Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to be taking a look at over-the-counter medications, vaccines, and anti-vaxxers. So first let's go ahead and take a look at over-the-counter medications. Now there's a huge misconception going on with over-the-counter medications. A lot of people believe that these medications help you fight the bacteria or virus that's in your body, but that is completely wrong. My grandmother, whenever I get sick, the first thing she always tells me, "Ay, mija, go ahead, go to the store, go buy something. You need to take something so that way you can get better sooner." That's not the way over-the-counter medications work. So over-the-counter medications, these are basically modern developments that allow us to get through our busy daily lives. So over-the-counter medications, whenever you take anything that you buy at the store, not prescribed by a doctor, that's different. Over-the-counter medications are things that you actually get at the store. When you take those things, all they do is turn off your body's defenses. And when your body's defenses get turned off, you actually feel better during that time period. But as soon as that over-the-counter medication wears off, you feel like crap again. And that's because it's just turning off your body's defenses. It turns off your fever. It turns off your mucus production. Okay? But think about it, those things are there for a reason. Fever heats up your body to try to kill bacteria and viruses. Mucus is there to actually trap bacteria and viruses. So you do feel better when you take these, but it's really not killing anything. It's not fighting off the bacteria virus. It's turning off your body's defenses, which makes you feel good for a short time until the body's defenses get turned back off again. But your body's defenses are there for a reason. They're there to tell you to rest. But our lives are so busy nowadays that people use these to get through their daily lives, which is understandable. I'm always busy and I'm guilty of taking them every now and then. I try really hard actually not to, but I do take them every now and then. All right, next, vaccines. So in the liquid of the vaccine are dead or weakened forms of a bacteria or virus or parts of a bacteria or virus that they're injecting into your body. When they inject those into your body, those things are supposed to be harmless. And what that does is it shows your body what the bacteria or virus looks like. So these dead or weakened forms or these parts of a bacteria or virus don't get you sick. I know some people say, wait, I got the flu shot once and I got sick. That was probably because you already had something in your body, another bacteria or virus, and your immune system now started fighting the vaccine, which is harmless, thinking it's the real thing, and it kind of divided and conquered your immune system. So that does happen sometimes. But for the most part, the stuff in a vaccine, it's harmless to you. Okay, so that stuff gets injected into your body and then it activates your immune system. Your immune system turns on. You make cytotoxic T cells, you make plasma cells, you make memory B cells, you make antibodies. All of these things are made so that way when the real bacteria or virus comes in, if you get it later in life, if it comes into your body, your immune system's already turned on and it'll attack it right away. Now, one of the big things about a vaccine is you must take it before you ever get sick. The vaccine doesn't kill bacteria or viruses. It just turns on your immune system to get ready to fight them. That is what a vaccine is all about. So it's really, really important to understand you can't get a vaccine after you've already gotten a virus. By then, it's too late. This is a prevention. You have to take it or you have to get a vaccine before you ever get sick. Okay? Now, before I get into anti-vaxxers are all about perspective. Okay? We look at the world based on our experiences, and the way we understand the world is based on experiences. And because of that, it's very, very hard for us to understand things that we have not experienced before. So perspective plays a huge part with anti-vaxxers. So take a look at this here. This is one of my favorite illusion images. This is not an animation. It's not a GIF or a GIF, whatever you call them. This is a regular image. If you stare at one of the circles, it stops, but the other ones keep on spinning. And you could do that from one to the other. If you want the whole thing to stop, if you stand back far enough, all the circles stop spinning. What's actually going on here? Your brain doesn't quite understand what it's seeing, and it's trying to figure it out. Okay, so perspective is really, really important here when we're talking about anti-vaxxers because they don't quite understand everything and they get false information, false evidence from a lot of sources. And when they try to put together, conspiracy theories come out. So that's kind of a perspective thing here. Okay, so even this, we've seen stuff like this. How we look at things can definitely affect how we see the world. Okay, this Sharpie is the same size as this, but because of the way it's drawn out, it makes it look like it's bigger and so on and so on. So we have to really stop and really look at evidence whenever we're making decisions about things. Okay, so perspective when it comes to diseases. How many people do you know have had smallpox, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, chickenpox, or pertussis? My guess, most of you guys don't know anybody who've had those things. Maybe chickenpox. Chickenpox is a real recent thing that we've actually developed a vaccine for. But for the most part, you've probably never heard of those before. And anti-vaxxers, one of the biggest arguments that they have for not vaccinating their kids or even vaccinating themselves is that these diseases weren't that bad because they haven't experienced them. So from their perspective, these diseases weren't that bad. Look, people survived, you know. And the second thing is, which is interesting, they say that these diseases must not have been bad, and there's tons of other reasons too. But here's another one: these diseases must not have been bad. That's why they don't exist anymore. They give no credit to vaccines whatsoever, which is really, really interesting here. Okay, so they say these diseases don't exist simply because they weren't that bad, and so they no longer exist anymore. Okay, smallpox, in fact, were so bad that it became practice in many places in Europe for a long time to not even name your kid until they actually survived smallpox. That's how crazy smallpox was. Smallpox is believed to have wiped out 90 to 95% of indigenous people in the Americas when Europeans brought smallpox over. So most of the indigenous people of North America and South America actually got wiped out. 90 to 95% of them got wiped out by smallpox. And that's just insane. So to say it wasn't a bad thing is crazy. Luckily, we've eradicated smallpox. Okay? Polio is another one. Again, anti-vaxxers have never experienced these things before. So they say, oh, they weren't that bad. Back in the day, 1930s, 40s, parents were so scared if their kids came down with flu-like symptoms because it could be the flu or it could have been polio. Now, polio is a virus that when it gets in your body, its host cells are actually your nerve cells. So it starts going in your nerve cells and destroying your nerve cells, turning them into virus factories and then destroying them in the end. So if someone wound up with polio, there was 3 major outcomes. Death would be one, paralysis, and then survival. Paralysis could be so bad, though, that you might live the whole rest of your life in these machines that they called an iron lung. So this machine actually had to breathe for you for the rest of your life because your nerve cells were so damaged that you couldn't even breathe on your own anymore. Okay? Measles. Measles is unfortunately making a comeback, and that's because of the most recent anti-vaxxer movement. Okay, but measles spread a rash all over your body, and it can actually lead to things like pneumonia that causes death, encephalitis that causes death, and then if someone survives, 7 to 10 years down the line, their brain could have actually been damaged so much that 7 to 10 years later, after measles are all gone, that it actually causes a disease that you actually wind up dying from that. So measles is one that you've probably never seen or experienced with your family. And then we have chickenpox. Chickenpox, there was a vaccine that was developed in 1995. I unfortunately was born in 1982, so I wound up with chickenpox when I was in 2nd grade. But ever since that vaccine's been formed, I don't know very many students that I have that have had chickenpox because of the vaccine. People get the vaccine and you don't see it. Now, when it comes to getting vaccinations, some states make it mandatory that you cannot attend public schools unless you've been vaccinated. California is one of those. So you could go to a private school, but you cannot go to public school unless you have been vaccinated, you've been immunized, because we don't want to spread diseases, and that definitely makes sense. In places where states don't have that, where it's not a mandatory thing, that's where we see outbreaks of certain diseases. So anti-vaxxers aren't brand new at all in any way, shape, or form. Anti-vaxxers have been around since the very first vaccine was actually formed. There's been instead of calling them anti-vaxxers, they were called anti-vaccination leagues and societies back in the day. But ever since the very first vaccine was created, there's been anti-vaxxers. Okay. Here's a cartoon by an anti-vaxxer. The very first vaccine was for smallpox, and it was a vaccine created by getting pus from cows that had cowpox, which is so similar to smallpox that when you put it in the human body, it makes antibodies and memory cells and cytotoxic T cells against it, and it basically protects you. So then if you get smallpox in your body, even though they put cowpox in, if you get smallpox virus in your body, your immune system's already turned on against it and can attack and destroy it right away. But in this cartoon, it shows, oh yeah, if you get the vaccine, you're going to have cows bursting out of your body, and all this nasty stuff, because people were afraid. One of the big reasons why anti-vaxxers come about, though, is because people don't like being told what to do. And that's usually where most anti-vaxxer movements start from, when the government says you have to get these vaccines. And it's not about being a dictator and trying to control everybody, but it's about the fact that you are not only responsible for yourself when it comes to these diseases, you're responsible for everybody. So you making a choice not to get a vaccine is going to affect other people around you. It's not just about you in this case, it affects everybody else around you too, if you don't get that vaccine. But again, I totally understand where people come from. They don't like being told what to do. Okay? So the current anti-vaxxer movement started in the late 90s when a scientist reported that vaccines cause autism. That report has been disproven, has been shown to be incorrect, time and time and time again. Okay, so there's been tons of scientists that have gone back, look at his data, and it actually appears that he falsified his data. And then it later came out that he was actually paid by a law group that was representing parents who had kids who had autism and believed that vaccines were the cause of it. So he clearly had a bias there, and he's been disproven over and over and over again. So the current anti-vaxxer movement is the connection between autism and vaccines, which is interesting because that wasn't a connection back then. So things change all the time. So with the anti-vaxxer movement, make sure you look into it, make sure you have good information, and that you're using evidence. And that's what it really comes down to. Because if we look at the two arguments of anti-vaxxers and we stop and think that they weren't that bad, talk to people who lived through it, they'll tell you it was bad. Okay? When we talk about old diseases that aren't around anymore. And then when you talk about the fact that they're not around anymore, why aren't they around anymore? More likely evidence points towards the vaccine, not simply that they just disappeared and went away. So why talk about anti-vaxxers and the anti-vaxxer movement if there's not a lot of scientific evidence there for them? Well, it comes down to consequences of these actions. So one of the biggest things to come out of the recent anti-vaxxer movement is a rise in measles cases. So remember, measles is where you get that rash all over your body, and then a lot of kids can die from complications. The age range to be affected by this the most is 5 years old. So the kids that die from this virus is usually around 5 years old when they die. So with this, because more and more parents around the world heard misinformation, they started not vaccinating their kids. And as a result of this, measles, which was a virus, a disease that was on its way out due to vaccination, we were on the road getting ready to eradicate measles. It's come back as a result of this. In 2018 alone, 140,000 kids died from the measles. Okay? And that was a huge spike, a huge rise compared to previous years. And you probably remember last year, there was a measles outbreak last year. The places where you see it the most is where you have the states in the United States that do not have it, where it's mandatory to be vaccinated or immunized before going to school. So that's where we see these outbreaks the most in states and areas that have those kind of policies. So it's really important to understand anti-vaxxers, where they come from. Don't judge, don't be mean about it. It's all about education and informing and learning. And if we understand why people do these things, and if we could find a way to help them understand, the science of it, then we could definitely make a difference.